You really drove that thing here? The laughter rolled across the valet lane beneath the glow of the Whitmore Grand Hotel like ice cracking over dark water. Damian Whitmore stood beside his black Rolls-Royce with one hand tucked inside his tailored coat, the city lights of downtown Chicago reflecting off the marble entrance behind him. Around him, investors in $1,000 suits smirked into crystal glasses while cameras flashed near the red carpet of the charity gala. Then came the sound again. A rough engine turning over somewhere near the curb. Old. Deep. Unapologetic. Heads turned as a faded midnight blue Mustang crawled into the valet circle. Its paint weathered, one headlight dimmer than the other, the chrome worn soft by decades of rain and highway dust. The car looked painfully out of place beside the polished Bentleys and foreign supercars lined beneath the hotel awning. A few guests chuckled openly now. One man muttered that it belonged in a museum. Another said a scrapyard would be kinder. But the young waitress climbing out of the driver's seat didn't seem embarrassed. Evelyn Brooks smoothed the sleeves of her black uniform and closed the door carefully, almost gently, like the car mattered more than anything else around her. Rain mist clung to the ends of her curls. Her shoes were worn from double shifts, but her posture stayed straight. Calm. Controlled. Damian watched her hand brush lightly across the hood before she handed the valet her keys. That tiny gesture annoyed him for reasons he couldn't explain. How much duct tape's holding that thing together? He asked loudly enough for the nearby guests to hear. Laughter burst again. Evelyn finally looked at him. Her eyes were dark, steady, unreadable. Not angry. Somehow worse. Enough to outlive bad decisions, she replied quietly. A few nearby guests exchanged looks. Damian gave a dry laugh and took a sip of bourbon from the glass in his hand. You know, he said, stepping closer to the Mustang, my company crushed cars like this 20 years ago. Evelyn's gaze shifted toward the glowing silver W logo mounted above the hotel entrance. Whitmore Automotive, one of the largest luxury car empires in America. Then she looked back at Damian. Funny, she said softly. This one helped build it. The air changed. Not dramatically. Just enough for one man standing near the valet podium to stop breathing for half a second. Miles Carter, 72 years old, retired engineer, slowly lowered the coffee cup in his hands. His tired eyes locked onto the Mustang's hood ornament. Not factory-made. Hand-carved steel. His face lost color instantly. Damian didn't notice. He was too busy smirking at what he assumed was attitude from a waitress trying to save face. That rust bucket built my company, he said. That's a new one. Evelyn didn't answer. Somewhere above them thunder rolled between the skyscrapers. The valet reached for the driver's door, but Miles suddenly stepped forward. Wait, he said sharply. His voice cracked with something dangerously close to fear. Everyone turned toward him now. The old engineer walked slowly toward the Mustang like a man approaching a ghost. Rain tapped against the pavement. Flashbulbs popped near the carpet. And then Miles saw it clearly. The engraving hidden beneath the hood trim. 3 tiny initials scratched into the metal by hand nearly 40 years ago. His fingers trembled. No, he whispered under his breath. That car's not supposed to exist. For a moment nobody moved. Rain whispered across the hotel driveway while the old engine ticked softly beneath the Mustang's hood, metal cooling beneath the Chicago night air. Miles Carter stood frozen beside the car, his wrinkled hand hovering inches above the faded blue paint, as though touching it might wake something buried decades ago. Damian gave a short, impatient laugh. Come on, Miles. You look like you just saw Elvis. A few guests chuckled politely, eager to follow the billionaire's lead. But Miles did not laugh. His eyes stayed fixed on the tiny initials carved beneath the trim. HB. The letters looked almost invisible beneath years of rust and weather. Yet to him, they burned brighter than the hotel lights overhead. Evelyn noticed the old engineer's expression immediately. Her shoulders tightened slightly. You know what those letters mean, she said quietly. Miles swallowed hard before answering. Harold Brooks, he whispered. Damian frowned. The name meant nothing to him. Should it? He asked. Miles looked up slowly, rain collecting along the edges of his gray eyebrows. Your father erased that name before you were old enough to drive. The laughter around the valet lane faded. Nearby investors exchanged uncertain glances. Damian's jaw shifted slightly, irritation replacing amusement. I think you are being dramatic over a junkyard Mustang. Evelyn reached for the keys in the valet's hand. Then stop looking at it, she replied. Her voice stayed calm, but there was something sharp hidden underneath now. Damien hated that tone. Not loud, not emotional, certain, like someone holding the answer while everyone else guessed the question. Before he could answer, one of the hotel managers rushed outside through the spinning glass doors. Evelyn, the Whitmore table is waiting. She nodded once and slipped past them toward the entrance, black sneakers brushing over wet marble. Damien watched her disappear into the gold light of the lobby. Then he looked back at the Mustang. The old car sat crooked beneath the rain, humble and worn beside machines worth more than most houses in Illinois. Yet somehow it now controlled the entire atmosphere outside the hotel. Miles exhaled slowly. That engine design. He stopped himself. Damien narrowed his eyes. What about it? The older man hesitated too long. Nothing. Miles. Damien's voice hardened. You worked beside my father for 30 years. If you know something, say it. Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the skyline. Miles glanced toward the hotel entrance to make sure Evelyn was gone before leaning closer. That car should have been destroyed in 1986. Damien stared at him. Destroyed by who? Miles did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked back toward the revolving doors where Evelyn had vanished into the ballroom crowd. Your family. The word landed heavier than Damien expected. Inside the hotel, music floated beneath crystal chandeliers while servers moved between tables carrying champagne and silver trays. Evelyn kept her eyes down as she crossed the ballroom floor. But her breathing had changed. Faster now. Near the kitchen entrance, another waitress caught up beside her. Girl, what happened out there? Everybody is talking. Evelyn tied her apron tighter around her waist. Nothing important. But before she could push through the kitchen doors, her phone buzzed inside her pocket. One message. Unknown number. They finally saw the car. Do not let Whitmore near the garage. Evelyn stopped cold. The color drained from her face. Because only 3 people in the world knew the garage even existed. And one of them had been dead for almost 15 years. The ballroom glittered with money and polished smiles, but Evelyn Brooks could barely hear the music anymore. The text message sat like ice in her stomach, while she balanced a silver tray of champagne through clusters of wealthy donors and executives beneath the massive crystal chandeliers. Do not let Whitmore near the garage. Her fingers tightened slightly around the tray. 15 years. That garage had stayed hidden for 15 years. Nobody was supposed to know it still existed. Near the center stage, Damien Whitmore laughed beside a group of investors while photographers snapped pictures under the gold banner celebrating Whitmore Automotive's newest electric prototype. His confidence filled the room easily. Sharp tuxedo. Perfect posture. The kind of man newspapers called self-made even when half the city knew he inherited everything. But every few seconds now, his eyes drifted back toward Evelyn moving through the ballroom. She noticed. She pretended not to. Across the room, Miles Carter sat alone at a small table near the orchestra platform, staring into a glass of untouched water. He looked pale. Older somehow. As if seeing the Mustang outside had dragged him backward through 40 years of secrets he thought were buried. Evelyn approached quietly and set a fresh napkin beside him. You should not have said his name out there, she whispered without looking at him directly. Miles gave a tired exhale. I did not think the car survived. Neither did they. The old engineer glanced around carefully before lowering his voice. Does Damien know? Evelyn shook her head. Once. No. And you plan to keep it that way? Before she could answer, applause erupted near the stage. Damien had stepped to the microphone beneath the massive Silver Company logo hanging above the ballroom. Tonight, he announced smoothly, we celebrate the future of American engineering. The crowd clapped harder. Evelyn felt something bitter twist inside her chest. Future. The word almost made her laugh. Damien continued speaking while giant digital screens behind him displayed sleek luxury vehicles rotating beneath blue light. Cars built on technology worth billions of dollars. Cars the world believed Whitmore Automotive invented. But Evelyn knew where the first design came from. She had grown up listening to the sound of her grandfather crying quietly in the garage after midnight when he thought nobody could hear him. Innovation, Damien continued proudly, is about legacy. Miles lowered his eyes. Evelyn could not look at the stage anymore. She turned toward the service hallway just as another buzz hit her phone. This time the message contained an address. No name. Just coordinates on the south side of Chicago. Then another message appeared beneath it. They are already looking. Her pulse quickened. She knew that address. The garage. Outside, rain hammered harder against the tall hotel windows while thunder rolled across Lake Michigan. Evelyn slipped through the kitchen doors and untied her apron with shaking fingers. One of the cooks looked up from the grill. You leaving already? Family emergency, she answered quickly. She grabbed her coat from the locker room and headed toward the employee exit. But the second she pushed open the steel door into the alley behind the hotel, headlights flashed across the wet pavement. A black SUV idled beside the curb. Damien Whitmore stepped out slowly, rain dotting the shoulders of his expensive coat. You disappear every time somebody mentions that car, he said. Evelyn froze beneath the dim alley light. Steam curled from nearby vents into the cold night air between them. Damien slipped his hands into his pockets, studying her carefully now instead of mocking her. I think it is time you tell me why one of my father's engineers looked terrified the second he saw your engine. Evelyn stared at him silently for a long moment before answering. Because your family spent 40 years pretending my grandfather never existed. The rain seemed louder after that. Damien's expression barely changed at first. But then Evelyn saw it. The first crack. Small. Uncertain. Dangerous. Confusion. The alley behind the hotel smelled like rain, asphalt, and engine smoke drifting up from Lower Wacker Drive. Water rolled off the fire escapes overhead in silver streams, while distant sirens echoed somewhere across downtown Chicago. Evelyn stood beneath the dim yellow security light with her coat pulled tight around her shoulders, her phone still cold in her hand. Damien Whitmore watched her carefully now, no longer amused. The confidence he carried inside the ballroom had faded slightly out here in the rain. You are saying my family stole something from your grandfather? He asked quietly. Evelyn let out a small breath through her nose. I am saying your company would not exist without him. Damien shook his head once almost automatically. That is impossible. Is it? She asked. You did not even know his name 10 minutes ago. The words landed harder than she expected. Damien looked away toward the glowing hotel windows where wealthy guests still moved beneath chandeliers and camera flashes. Everything inside looked polished, controlled, safe. Out here the city felt different. Honest somehow. Harold Brooks, Damien repeated slowly, testing the name like he was searching his memory for a place it should have been. Nothing came. Evelyn noticed the frustration building behind his eyes. My grandfather worked in your father's research division back in the 1980s, she said. He designed engines nobody thought were possible back then. Smaller, faster, cleaner fuel systems before anybody else even cared. Damien frowned. Whitmore Automotive developed those systems in-house. Evelyn gave him a look so tired it almost hurt to watch. That is what your father told the world. Thunder rolled again over the skyline. Somewhere nearby, an elevated train screeched across wet rails. Damien crossed his arms against the cold. If what you are saying is true, why has nobody ever heard this story? Evelyn laughed softly then. Not because anything was funny. Because she had heard that question her entire life. Because people like my grandfather do not get documentaries. They get erased. Damien opened his mouth to answer, but no words came immediately. He hated uncertainty. Hated standing in conversations where somebody else controlled the facts. Finally he asked, and the car? Evelyn's eyes shifted toward the street where her Mustang still sat beneath the rain at the front valet circle. That car was his first working prototype. Damien stared at her. No. Yes. That model was never released. Exactly. The silence stretched between them while rain tapped steadily against metal dumpsters nearby. Damien suddenly remembered Miles Carter's face beside the Mustang. Pale. Frightened. Not surprised by the car. Frightened of it. Why would my father hide something like this? He asked quietly. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment before answering. Because your father did not build an empire from scratch. The alley seemed colder after that sentence. Damien's jaw tightened slightly. Defensiveness flashed across his face. Careful. Evelyn stepped closer now, not intimidated by the warning in his voice. No. You be careful. You laughed at that car tonight because you saw rust and faded paint. But every bolt in that engine was built by a man who spent his whole life watching somebody else take credit for his work. Damien held her stare, but for the first time since they met, he did not have a quick response. Somewhere inside the hotel ballroom, applause erupted again after another speech. The sound echoed faintly through the rain. Evelyn shook her head slowly. You stand in there talking about legacy, while my grandfather died believing nobody remembered his name. Damien swallowed once, harder than he meant to. Then Evelyn's phone buzzed again. Her eyes dropped to the screen instantly. One new message. They opened the storage unit. She went still. Completely still. Damien noticed immediately. What happened? Evelyn looked up slowly, fear finally breaking through her calm expression for the first time all night. If they found the garage, she whispered, then somebody is looking for the original blueprints. Damien stared at Evelyn as the rain poured harder around them, washing silver streaks across the alley pavement beneath the hotel lights. What blueprints? He asked immediately. Evelyn already had her phone pressed tightly in her hand, her breathing uneven now. Whatever calm she carried earlier had started to crack. The originals, she said softly. The first engine designs my grandfather built before Whitmore Automotive released anything publicly. Damien frowned. If those designs existed, why keep them hidden all these years? Evelyn looked at him like the answer should have been obvious. Because paper survives longer than lies. The words settled heavily between them. Somewhere behind the hotel, a delivery truck rattled past the alley entrance, splashing water across the curb. Damien glanced toward the street, then back at her. Who sent those messages? I do not know. Then how do they know about the garage? Evelyn hesitated too long. Damien noticed instantly. You told someone. No. Then somebody followed you. That possibility seemed to hit her all at once. Her eyes shifted toward the front of the hotel where the Mustang sat beneath the valet awning. Damien followed her gaze. You think somebody came because of the car? I know they did. Rainwater dripped from the ends of her curls as she stepped away from the wall. I need to get there before they do. Damien blocked her path without touching her. Where is this garage? Evelyn shook her head immediately. No. If somebody is breaking into a storage unit connected to my company, I deserve answers. She laughed once under her breath. Tired. Sharp. Your company already took the answers 40 years ago. Damien felt the sting of that because part of him no longer knew how to deny it. Too many things were beginning to connect in ways he did not like. Miles Carter's reaction. The hidden initials. His father's missing research archives after 1986. Even the timing bothered him. Whitmore Automotive was unveiling a revolutionary new engine platform tomorrow morning. And suddenly an old prototype connected to erased designs appeared outside his hotel. Could not be coincidence. Evelyn. His voice softened for the first time all night. If somebody is after those blueprints, this may be bigger than you think. She looked up at him carefully now, almost suspicious of the sudden change in tone. You really do not know what your father did, do you? Damien held her stare without answering. Because for the first time in years, he was not completely sure who his father had been. A cold gust of wind swept through the alley, carrying the distant smell of Lake Michigan and wet concrete. Then another voice suddenly echoed from behind them. She is right not to trust you. Both turned sharply. Miles Carter stood beneath the alley entrance holding an umbrella crooked against the rain. His face looked exhausted, older than ever. He walked toward them slowly. Damien's jaw tightened. You followed us? I came because if Evelyn opens that garage alone tonight, she will not survive the truth in it. Evelyn crossed her arms tightly. You knew where it was? Miles nodded once. Harold showed me before he died. Damien stepped forward immediately. Then tell me what is happening. The old engineer removed his glasses carefully, rain trembling along the lenses. Your father did not just steal Harold Brooks's engine designs, he said quietly. He built Whitmore Automotive around them. Damien felt something cold move through his chest. That is impossible. No, Miles whispered. Impossible is watching a brilliant man disappear from history, while somebody else accepts awards for his work. The alley fell silent except for rain hitting metal fire escapes overhead. Then Miles looked directly at Damien with eyes filled not with anger, but regret. The prototype outside your hotel was the first car your company ever copied. Damien's face lost color slightly. Evelyn noticed. So did Miles. Because for the first time all night, the billionaire no longer looked powerful. He looked afraid. The rain had slowed to a cold mist by the time Evelyn unlocked the Mustang and slid into the driver's seat. The dashboard lights flickered softly across her face while the old engine rumbled alive beneath the hood like something waking from a long sleep. Damien stood beside the passenger door for half a second before opening it without asking. Evelyn looked at him sharply. You are not coming. Too late, he answered quietly, shutting the door behind him. Miles Carter climbed carefully into the back seat with a tired groan, clutching his umbrella across his knees. The Mustang pulled away from the hotel curb and disappeared into the wet Chicago streets, while the glittering gala lights faded behind them. For several blocks nobody spoke. Downtown towers slid past the windows in silver reflections, while windshield wipers scraped steadily through the drizzle. Damien sat stiffly in the passenger seat, one hand resting against the dashboard as though he still could not believe he was riding inside the same car he mocked less than an hour earlier. But now he noticed details he had ignored before. The steering wheel had been hand-stitched. The gauges were custom-built. Even the engine sounded different from any classic Mustang he had ever heard. Cleaner. Sharper. Almost modern despite the age. This was never factory-made, he murmured finally. Evelyn kept her eyes on the road. No. Then how did your grandfather build this? In secret. Damien turned toward her. Why secret? Miles answered from the back seat before Evelyn could. Because Whitmore Automotive told Harold Brooks his ideas were impossible. The old engineer's voice sounded heavy with memory now. Then 6 months later, your father unveiled nearly identical concepts at an investor conference in Detroit. Damien stared ahead through the rain-streaked windshield. My father would never have risked something that obvious. Miles gave a sad laugh. Back then nobody expected a black engineer from the South Side to fight a billion-dollar company in court. Silence filled the car again after that. Evelyn tightened her grip slightly on the wheel. She remembered the nights her grandfather sat inside that garage surrounded by blueprints nobody wanted to acknowledge. She remembered grease stains on his hands, bills stacked on the kitchen counter. The quiet way he used to say maybe next year they will tell the truth. But next year never came. The Mustang exited the freeway and turned into an older industrial district near the river, where warehouses sat dark beneath flickering streetlights. Damien frowned as abandoned brick buildings rolled past outside. The garage is here? Evelyn nodded once. My grandfather rented the place under another name after he left Whitmore Automotive. Miles leaned forward slightly. He believed someday somebody would come looking for proof. Damien looked at him sharply. And did they? The old engineer did not answer immediately. Instead he stared out the window at the empty streets sliding by. Not until tonight. Evelyn turned down a narrow alley lined with rusted loading docks and chain-link fences. At the far end stood a small brick warehouse with faded paint and boarded upper windows. One dim light glowed above a steel garage door. But something felt wrong immediately. Evelyn slowed the car. The padlock hung broken from the latch. Damien saw it too. Someone got here first. The engine idled softly while rain tapped against the roof. Nobody moved at first. Then Evelyn shut off the car and stepped out into the cold night air. Damien followed close behind her while Miles remained near the car, his face pale again. The garage door stood slightly open now, darkness stretching inside beyond the narrow gap. Evelyn pushed the metal slowly upward. The hinges groaned loudly into the night. Dust floated through the beam of a single hanging light bulb still swinging gently overhead. And then Damien saw it. Blueprint pages scattered across the concrete floor. Filing cabinets left open. Drawers emptied. But near the center of the garage, untouched beneath a gray tarp, sat another car. Smaller. Sleeker. Hidden for decades beneath dust and silence. Evelyn stopped breathing for a moment. Because even she had never seen that vehicle uncovered before. Miles whispered from behind them with a trembling voice. Dear God. Damien stepped closer toward the shape beneath the tarp. Then he noticed the emblem stamped into the front grille. Not Whitmore Automotive. Harold Brooks. The hanging light bulb swayed gently above the garage, throwing long shadows across the concrete floor while rain tapped against the old warehouse windows. Damien stood frozen beside the uncovered vehicle, unable to take his eyes off the emblem stamped into the grille. Harold Brooks. Not Whitmore Automotive. Not his father's name. Harold's. The sleek silver prototype beneath the tarp looked decades ahead of its time, even under layers of dust. The body was aerodynamic. Clean. Elegant. Nothing like the bulky luxury sedans Whitmore Automotive sold during the 1980s. Damien slowly circled the car, his polished shoes scraping lightly across scattered blueprint pages. This cannot be real, he whispered. Evelyn walked past him without answering and knelt beside an overturned filing cabinet near the back wall. Her hands moved quickly through folders and yellowed documents scattered across the floor. Some pages were soaked from rain leaking through the cracked roof. Others had been ripped open in a hurry. Whoever came before them had been searching for something specific. Miles Carter stepped carefully into the garage behind them, staring at the prototype with wet eyes. Harold finished it, he said softly, almost to himself. I told him nobody would ever let him build it. Damien looked toward the old engineer sharply. You knew about this car? Miles nodded slowly. Only pieces of it. Harold kept most of the project hidden after your father started taking meetings with investors. Evelyn finally found a small metal box beneath the cabinet and pulled it free with both hands. Dust coated the lid. Her breathing caught immediately. No, she whispered. Damien moved closer. What is it? She brushed the dust away carefully until faded handwriting appeared across the top. Property of H. Brooks. Personal recordings. Miles closed his eyes briefly the second he saw the box. He kept audio journals, the old engineer said quietly. Every design. Every meeting. Every promise your father made him. Damien felt cold all over. Evelyn opened the box slowly. Inside sat dozens of cassette tapes stacked neatly beside handwritten notebooks tied together with faded red string. Her fingers trembled as she picked one up. Tape number 7. Investor demonstration prototype complete. Damien stared at the tapes like they were explosives. You are telling me your grandfather recorded everything? Evelyn nodded once without looking at him. Because nobody believed black engineers back then unless they had proof. The words hit Damien harder than he expected. He turned away and looked around the garage again. The walls were covered with faded sketches of engines, suspension systems, fuel diagrams, and handwritten calculations stretching back decades. His father's company logos appeared nowhere. Only Harold Brooks's name. Again and again. Like a ghost history tried to bury. Then Damien noticed something else near the workbench. Framed beneath dusty glass hung a photograph from 1984. 2 young men standing beside the silver prototype. One was Harold Brooks smiling proudly in grease-stained coveralls. The other was Damien's father, Charles Whitmore. Arm around Harold's shoulder. Smiling too. Like partners. Damien picked up the frame slowly. His throat tightened. My father knew him. Miles gave a bitter laugh under his breath. Charles Whitmore did more than know him. Harold trusted him. Silence filled the garage again. Heavy. Suffocating. Then Evelyn opened one of the notebooks carefully. Inside were original engineering drawings signed and dated years before Whitmore Automotive filed their first patents. Damien felt his stomach drop. The dates matched perfectly. Every major innovation that made his family billions had existed here first. In Harold Brooks's handwriting. Evelyn looked up at Damien with eyes full of exhaustion more than anger now. My grandfather died believing the world forgot him, she said softly. And tonight you laughed at the last thing he ever built. Damien opened his mouth to answer, but no defense came. Because standing inside that garage surrounded by proof, he could finally feel the shape of the truth closing around him. Then suddenly Miles turned toward the warehouse in trance, his face tightening. Headlights flashed briefly through the rain outside. Somebody else had found the garage. The 3 of them turned toward the warehouse in trance as white headlights cut through the rain outside, sweeping across the cracked concrete floor like searchlights. Evelyn instinctively grabbed the metal box of cassette tapes against her chest, while Damien stepped closer to the garage opening. A black sedan rolled slowly to a stop outside the building. Expensive. Tinted windows. Corporate. The engine shut off. For one long second, nobody moved. Then the driver's door opened and a tall man in a charcoal coat stepped out holding an umbrella against the rain. Damien recognized him instantly. "Grant Holloway," he said under his breath. Evelyn looked toward him sharply. "Who is that?" Damien's jaw tightened. "Chief Legal Officer for Whitmore Automotive." Miles Carter looked suddenly sick. "Then they know." Grant Holloway walked calmly toward the garage entrance, polished shoes splashing through puddles. He stopped beneath the hanging light and glanced inside at the uncovered prototype. His expression changed for the briefest second before returning to professional calm. "Mr. Whitmore," he said smoothly, "your security team noticed your vehicle leaving the gala unexpectedly. We were concerned." Damien stared at him coldly. "Concerned enough to track me?" Grant ignored the question. His eyes shifted toward Evelyn and the metal box in her arms. "Miss Brooks." The way he said her name made Evelyn grip the tapes tighter. "You should not be here." She gave a short, bitter laugh. "My grandfather built this place." Grant's polite smile barely moved. "Legally, this property belongs to Whitmore Automotive." Miles suddenly stepped forward. "That is a lie and you know it." Grant finally looked at the old engineer. "Miles, I was wondering if you would involve yourself eventually." Damien glanced between them. "You knew about this?" Grant folded his hands calmly in front of him. "I know enough to understand why certain things are better left in the past." The rain hammered harder against the warehouse roof now, drowning the silence that followed. Damien's voice dropped lower. "Dangerous. What exactly are you trying to hide?" Grant looked directly at him then. "Your father spent 40 years protecting this company from scandal. Tomorrow morning Whitmore Automotive unveils the most important launch in its history. If those tapes become public now, billions of dollars disappear overnight." Evelyn shook her head slowly in disbelief. "That is what you care about?" "I care about thousands of employees losing jobs because of allegations tied to events from the 1980s. "Not allegations," Miles snapped. "Proof." Grant's eyes hardened slightly. "Proof can disappear." Damien looked at him sharply. "What does that mean?" But Grant ignored him and turned back toward Evelyn. "Miss Brooks, Whitmore Automotive is prepared to compensate you generously for anything found in this garage." Evelyn stared at him like he had insulted something sacred. "You think this is about money?" Grant opened one hand calmly. "I think your grandfather would have wanted his family taken care of." Evelyn stepped forward slowly now, eyes burning with something deeper than anger. "My grandfather wanted his name back." The warehouse fell silent except for rain and the low hum of the hanging light overhead. Damien watched Grant carefully now. Really watched him. The corporate calm. The controlled words. The fear hidden underneath. And suddenly Damien understood something that made his stomach tighten. His father had not buried this alone. The company was still protecting the lie even now. Grant reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. "There is enough here to change your life, Miss Brooks." Damien looked disgusted. Evelyn did not even glance at the envelope. Instead, she slowly removed one cassette tape from the box and held it up beneath the light. Tape number 12. Final engine demonstration with Charles Whitmore. Grant's composure cracked for the first time. Just slightly. But Damien saw it. So did Evelyn. "You already knew what was on these tapes," Damien said quietly. Grant said nothing. Damien stepped closer now, his voice colder than before. "How long has this company been hiding my father's theft?" Grant looked at him carefully before answering. "Long enough that exposing it now would destroy everything your family built." Damien stared at the silver prototype behind him, then at the trembling tapes in Evelyn's hands. And for the first time in his life, the billionaire realized his empire might not belong to his family at all. The rain had stopped by sunrise, but Chicago still looked washed in gray when Damien Whitmore stepped onto the stage inside the packed convention hall the next morning. Cameras flashed beneath towering silver banners while reporters filled every row waiting for the official unveiling of Whitmore Automotive's newest billion-dollar engine platform. Giant screens glowed blue behind the stage. Investors whispered confidently into phones. Executives smiled beside polished concept cars spinning slowly beneath white lights. Everything had been rehearsed down to the second, but Damien barely heard any of it. Because backstage, resting quietly beneath a black cover near the loading entrance, sat Harold Brooks's silver prototype. And beside it stood Evelyn Brooks in her waitress uniform and old black coat, holding a worn metal box against her chest. Grant Holloway approached Damien one last time minutes before the presentation began. "There is still time to handle this privately," he said carefully. Damien adjusted the cuffs of his dark suit without looking at him. "You mean quietly?" Grant lowered his voice. "If you do this publicly, your father's name is destroyed forever." Damien finally turned toward him then. There was no anger left in his face now, only disappointment. "Maybe that is the problem," he said softly. His name survived while the right one disappeared. Before Grant could answer, the stage manager signaled from the curtain. It was time. Applause exploded through the convention hall as Damien walked beneath the lights. Thousands of people rose to their feet. The heir to one of America's largest automotive empires stood alone at center stage while cameras streamed his image across the country live. Damien looked out across the crowd for a long moment without speaking. Then he glanced once toward Evelyn waiting near the side entrance. She gave the smallest nod, barely visible, but enough. Damien stepped to the microphone slowly. "Last night," he began quietly, "I learned that the story I inherited about this company was incomplete." The audience shifted slightly. Reporters lowered pens. Confusion moved through the room. Behind Damien, the giant presentation screens flickered away from the planned product video. Instead, an old photograph appeared. Two young men beside a silver prototype car in a dusty garage. Harold Brooks smiling proudly beside Charles Whitmore. A murmur swept through the convention hall immediately. Damien continued speaking, his voice steady despite the weight pressing behind every word. "For decades, Whitmore Automotive claimed certain engineering breakthroughs as our own. But the truth is, many of those innovations were created by a man whose name history erased." Another image appeared. Handwritten blueprints signed Harold Brooks. Then another. Patent sketches dated years before Whitmore Automotive publicly unveiled identical technology. Gasps echoed through the crowd now. Investors stared at the screens in disbelief. Grant Holloway stood frozen backstage. Damien looked directly into the cameras. Harold Brooks was a black engineer from the south side of Chicago. He built the first working prototype that became the foundation of this company, and my family took credit for it. The room went completely silent. Somewhere near the front row, a camera shutter clicked sharply in the stillness. Damien swallowed once before continuing. "Last night I mocked a woman for driving an old car into my hotel parking lot." His eyes shifted toward Evelyn standing quietly near the stage entrance. "What I did not understand was that her grandfather built the future before the world was willing to see him." Slowly, Damien stepped away from the microphone and walked toward the side curtain. Then, in front of the entire convention hall, he pulled the black cover away from Harold Brooks's silver prototype. Light exploded across the polished metal beneath decades of dust finally cleaned away overnight. The audience gasped again, because even now the car looked ahead of its time. Beautiful. Revolutionary. Real. Evelyn stood frozen beside it as cameras turned toward her. Damien faced the crowd one final time. "Today, Whitmore Automotive begins correcting a 40-year-old lie." Then he looked directly at Evelyn and held out the company founder's gold medallion that once belonged to his father. "This company was built on Harold Brooks's vision," he said quietly, "and his family deserves the credit we stole." Evelyn stared at the medallion for a long moment before taking it carefully into her hands. Tears filled her eyes, but she did not cry. She only looked at the silver prototype beside her grandfather's name shining beneath the lights while thousands of strangers rose slowly to their feet around her. And for the first time in 40 years, Harold Brooks was finally remembered.